Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. My screen is also visible, right?
Yes.
Okay. So today we are going to discuss, first we will discuss what is how to work with asynchronous programming with entity framework. And then I will show you how we can perform database bulk operations, right? Using entity framework, right? So before starting today's session, so what is asynchronous programming, guys? Why we should, when we should use asynchronous programming?
When you use it, when you want to release the main thread or release the thread.
Right. So basically, if you want to release the calling thread, right, it might be the main thread or it might be another thread, but whatever the thread calling your asynchronous method, right, and if you want to release that thread while you are waiting for some response, right, that response might be a database call response, right, that response might be some a third-party API response, right? So if, instead of waiting for the response, let release the thread so that the same thread can do some other task, right? And whenever we receive the output, whenever we receive the response from the database, or whenever we receive the response from the API, right, then let the application to use one of the threadful thread to do other the remaining task, right? So in this way, what will happen, instead of blocking the main thread or the calling thread, we should release the thread so that the same main thread or calling thread can do some other task, which will give us some responsiveness, right? So which will improve the application performance, right? And that is the main objective of asynchronous programming. Asynchronous programming means it is going to utilize the thread effectively. Instead of blocking the thread, it will release the thread so that the same thread can go and do some other task. And at the same time, when it receives the response, right? So at that time, one of the threadful thread will come into the picture and do the rest of the task in the async method, right? So that is what we have already discussed. And the same concept it is also going to applicable here. Let us discuss. Asynchronous asynchronous operations are used to avoid blocking a thread while the query is executed in the database, right? So if we are working with the entity framework, means what? In this case, we are not going to call any third party API, right? How to call the API we have already discussed. Right? So in this session, give me guys 1 minute. Right? So basically, how to call a API using asynchronous programming, right? That we have already discussed. So today, our main focus is, suppose we are executing some database query, right? At that time, how we can make this execution async, right? So that means what? It means suppose our query execution takes place 10 seconds, right? Then we should not block our main thread for 10 seconds. We should release the main thread so that the main thread can do some other task. And once that query is executed on the database, and once the response is received, right? Once the result is received, then we will make sure that one of the threadful thread will come into the picture and will execute rest of the code inside the async method. That is what we are going to discuss. So asynchronous programming has been introduced in .NET Framework 4.5, right? So this is introduced in .NET Framework 4.5. Means what now in entity framework you are also going to use, right? Asynchronous programming allows executing operations in the background so that the main thread can continue to execute its own operation. In this way, the main thread can keep the user interface responsive while the background thread is processing the task in the background, right? So in simple word, we can say that asynchronous programming in .NET application allows us to handle the thread of our processes in a more efficient way. We have already discussed everything related to asynchronous programming. Asynchronous programming means it will effectively utilize our thread, right? So effectively utilize thread in the sense it will not block the thread while waiting for a response, right? That response might be from an external system, right? Suppose you are calling one web API, right? That web API taking 2 seconds or 5 seconds to provide the response, right? Then you should not wait for that response. The thread should not wait for the response, right? The thread should release so that the same thread can do some other task. And whenever you receive the response, another thread will come into the picture. Not only web service, you can also suppose you are making some database call, right? Or you are working with file management system, file handling, right? Then in that time also, you can make sure that the calling thread or the main thread should release and do some other task. And whenever you receive from the data from the database, another thread will come into the picture. What is the advantages and how you are doing this thing, right? If you have a web application, right, then it will able to serve more HTTP requests at the same time by using asynchronous programming. We have already discussed this thing, right? This is because now see, whenever right, so whenever a request comes, right, whenever a request come to your web application, then to handle that request a thread is required, right? Suppose your application can manage, or suppose your application can handle, right, 100 threads, right? That means maximum 100 request it can handle. But if those 100 threads are blocked, right, then no new more request it can handle. But think the scenario, instead of blocking, you are releasing the threads, right, while waiting for some other responses. Then the same thread can handle a new request. That means if you are having more number of threads to available threads, right, that means the more number of HTTP requests they can handle, right? The more the threads are available, the more the HTTP request the application can process, right? Entity framework 6.7, 6.x, right? From entity framework 6, right? Asynchronous operations are supported, right? So this asynchronous operation not only support for coring the data, that means not only for select query, right, but for insert, update, and delete queries, right? So if you are performing some insert operation, update operation, or delete operation, or select operation, that means for each and every operation, you can make use of this asynchronous operation. You can make that operation asynchronous so that the thread can be released, right? That means the entity framework allows us to execute a query asynchronously using an entity instance of a DB context class. Right? The advantages of using asynchronous programming means it will make your application more responsive. It will improve the overall performance of your application by avoiding deadlocks, right? And guys, we have already discussed if you want to work with asynchronous programming, then you have to understand two keyword or two operators. What are these? Now, these are async operator and await operator, or you can say async and await keyword. So, what is the idea? The idea is that you have to mark the method as async, right? Once you mark the method as async, right? Then, guys, tell me what should be the return type of that method, guys?
Should be task.
Task or a task of a T. So if your method is returning something, then the return type should be task of T. Or if the method is doesn't return anything, then you have to use the return type as a task. Clear? We have already discussed this thing. I don't know why you guys are taking so much time to give the answer, right? And the second one is suppose I want to suppose I'm invoking one async method and I want the main thread should wait till the async method return me the data. Then what operator I need to use, right? So await operator means what? Now the await operator will make sure the thread, right? The thread should release, right? So what it means now, okay. So to give you a brief idea, so you can see. So here, this is my async method, right? This is my async method. You can see this get all student async. This is a method, and I have created this method with the keyword async. That means it is an async method. As it is a async method, and as it is going to return me list of student, so I have specified the return type as a task of T. And what is T here? T is nothing but a list of student. So this is the return type. And here you can see I have written the query, and here I have written, so in this case from item in context dot student select item. In this case it is just preparing the query, not executing the query. When I invoke this to list async method, right, it is going to execute the query in the database and it is going to return me the result. But guys, remember here what operator I have used? I have used the await operator. What exactly it means? Can anybody tell me? If I'm using await operator here, then what will happen?
It's gonna return to the calling thread.
So in this case, suppose your main thread calling this method, then this context object is created by the main thread. This query is prepared by the main thread. This method call, right? What you are calling this to list async method, that is also going to be executed by the main thread. But here you have used the await operator. As you have used the await operator here, then what will happen? Now it will release the main thread, right? Which is currently executing your application code. The thread which is executing your application code, that thread will be released, right? So that that thread can go and do some other task. And whenever the query execution completed, right? And here I have not written any other code, but if you have written any other code, then those code are going to be executed by a different thread, right? And that different thread will come from the thread pool. We have already discussed that thread pooling concept, right? And that thread will come into the picture and will execute rest of the code. So basically, if you are working with asynchronous programming, you have to very sure related to three things. You have to know what is the use of async method. This will make this method as asynchronous, right? So that you can call this method asynchronously. You have to use the return type as a task or a task of T. When you need to use task, in this case you can say I'm using return type and I'm returning something, right? If you are returning something, that something you need to specify within this angular bracket. And here what is the something? The something is a list of students, so I have specified list of students. Only one student you are returning, then you have to specify task of student. You have written a single value, right? Integer value. Then you have to return the integer type here, task of integer. So this return type basically depend what kind of data you are returning from your asynchronous method. And you have to use this await operator. This await operator will release the main thread or the calling thread, whichever thread calling this method. Most of the time it is the main thread, or if it is not the main thread, any other thread, that thread is going to be released and that thread is going to do some other task, right? And when this toList async method execution is completed, whenever it receives the data from the database, in that case, one of the thread from the thread pool will come into the picture and will execute rest of the code, right? This is the use of a await operator, right? So this is how you are going to use a synchronous method, right? So as of now, you have you know there is a method called a toList, right? But now I'm not going to use a toList. I'm using toList async, right? Why? Because you cannot use that await operator to a non-async method, right? If you are calling to a list method, then you cannot call this you cannot use this await operator. We have already discussed we can only use await operator while calling an async method. So in this case, this is one async method, so I can use this await operator. If it is toList method, then I cannot use this await operator because await operator is only going to await the operation which is async, right? If it is a non-async method, then you cannot await the method operation, right? So this is how you need to use async await in entity framework, right? For example, let me give you one example. Suppose my requirement is I have to design one async method where I need to provide the student ID, and based on the student ID, right, it should return me the student data asynchronously, right? Then for that purpose, just tell me, you want a particular student data, then what should be the return type of the method? Task of a
Students.
student. And as asynchronous, you have to mark this method as async, right? And here, guys, remember, I have declared one variable student. Initially, I initialized this variable with the default value. Then I created the context object, right? Then I'm using this query here, right? So context dot student dot fast or default. We have already discussed fast or default, but in this case, I'm going to use the await operator. If I'm going to use the await operator, then I cannot use the fast or default method, right? Then what method I need to use? I need to use faster default async method, right? For each method, right, whatever we have discussed so far, there is an asynchronous version that async is available. And whatever the logic you have to provide, that you can provide here, is such that s dot student id equals to student id. And here I'm using the await operator. So as I'm using the await operator here, that means at that particular time, when it is invoking this method, that main thread will release, that main thread will go and do some other task, right? And whenever this faster default async method execution is completed, whenever the response is received from the database, another thread will come into the picture, and that thread will assign that response to this student variable. That another thread is going to execute this get student method completed, and that another thread is going to return the student data, right? So this is the use of async, await, and task of a T. So you can use the task of T as a return type for your asynchronous method or task, right? And you can use await operator when calling the asynchronous methods, right? Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So the way we have used the asynchronous, right, programming, the way we have discussed, this is the same thing, nothing new, right? So let us understand this with an example, right? So this is main method started, right? So what you can see here, you can see main method start by thread ID, right? So how to get the unique thread ID? We have already know thread dot current thread dot managed thread ID. So that means whichever thread executing your application, right? That thread unique ID it is going to return, right? So in this case, the main thread ID who is going to print here. Then I'm calling this get student method, right? I'm calling this get student method, and you can see this get student method is an asynchronous method, right? It is taking the input as student ID, and it is going to return that particular student data. So I have mentioned the return type as a task of T, and as it's an asynchronous method, so I'm making this method as async, right? So this is an asynchronous method because from the asynchronous context only you can use the await operator. If it is not an async method, then you cannot call this await operator. See, I'm making this as a non-async. So I cannot call this await operator, right? So you have to make this method as async in order to use the await operator, right? Then you can say what I'm doing here. I'm just printing the, right? So in this case, I'm also printing the thread ID, which is executing your get method, right? So in this case, you can see this is the main method started, or you can say main thread. Main thread ID will be printed here. Main thread is calling this method, right? That main thread is also, main thread ID is also going to print in this case, right? Here it is creating the student object, right? It is using the context, it is creating an instance of the context class. In you can use var, or you can also use this class name, right? So whichever option you like, you can go with, right? Then what I'm saying now, faster default method start by thread ID. So whichever method call this, right, whichever thread call this, that thread ID I'm printing. In this case also you will see the thread ID is nothing but your main thread ID. But in the next line, I have written the linky query to return the result from the database, right? So in this case, this is the async method I'm using, right? As this is the async method, and here I'm using the await operator, right? So you can say now, right, this operation is awaited. Awaited means now this await operator will release the thread, right, to whichever thread ID, main thread ID. That thread is released, and that thread, once it is released, it will come to this place, and that thread will again immediately it will print the this statement, right? And after this statement, so what I have written, I have written query.result. So in this case, at this particular statement, query.result means the main thread will block, right? So in this case, main thread will release, main thread will execute this statement. But in this case, the main thread will be blocked, and until and unless you are not getting the result from your asynchronous method. Once you get the result from your asynchronous method, then the same main thread going to print this first name, last name, and the main method completed, and that main thread ID will be printed here, right? Now, so you have released the main thread, right? After calling this method, right? So once you call this method, you have released the main thread, right? And when this faster default method execution is completed, right? That means data is returned from the database. That means then how you will assign the data to this variable, how these next statements are going to be executed, who is going to execute, right? In that case, one of the thread from the thread pool, right, will come into the picture, and that thread will store that data or the student information which is retrieved by this method to this student variable. And then that particular thread pool thread will execute. So in this case, you will see a different thread ID. You will not see the main thread ID. You will see a different thread ID here, and you will see a different thread ID here, right? So let me run this application and show you the output. Right? So you can see main method start by thread ID 1, get student method start by thread ID 1, faster default async method started by thread ID 1, right? So once you see, once this statement is executed, then it is not printing this statement, right? Rather, it is printing main method doing some other task, right? Main method doing some other task. Which thread is doing this task? What is the thread ID?
Main
One.
thread.
That means from this statement, right, it is printing this statement. That means the thread is released or not, right? Does that thread wait to receive the response from this method? Does that thread, after executing this statement, it is printing this statement, or this statement is printed first,
It will release that and the
right?
main.
So you can see this is, but after then you have called this result property on this query, right? So in this case, this result will make sure that this method what I'm calling here should completed, should receive the result, then only I can proceed further. So in this case, it will block the main thread, right? And block the main thread when how long it will block the main thread? As long as this method is, get student completed and it returns the student data, right? So in this case, you can see, and after then, right, these two statements are going to faster default async method completed, get student method completed, right? And in this case, you can see faster default method completed by a different thread or the same main thread,
Different thread.
different thread. And then whatever the data, it is written student information, right? That is going to be printed by the main thread, and then main thread is going to be completed. Clear, guys? So this is how you can use asynchronous programming with entity framework, right? So in this example, what I have seen, what I have shown you, how to query the data, right? So in this case, we are simply retrieving the data, right? But it is also possible, right? So as I mentioned from the beginning, right? So not only you can query the asynchronous operation, but also you can asynchronous the update operation or async the insert operation, async. You can make the delete operation asynchronous, right? That means what? Now it is also provide an async version of the save changes method, right? So we have already discussed what is the use of a save changes, right? So save changes basically when you call the step changes method on the context object, right? Based on the entity state, right? Based on the entity state, it is going to generate the respective insert, update, and the DML statement and execute on the database, right? So we can also make that step changes method as async, right? How? See,
Uh,
in this case, this is one step
the
changes.
one doubt.
Hello?
Hello.
Anybody saying anything?
Yes, sir. I have one doubt. Can you please go to the previous? Uh, yeah. Here, where student equal to query dot result is not an async method. No. How why it will wait
Which
for
one
the
is not? Which one is not the async method?
yeah, where get student when we are calling it,
Hmm.
this task is async task.
I'm not understanding which one is not async method and what is exactly your query.
Okay, so the statement after that get student will wait by the thread you said, right?
Which
Main
statement you are talking? Please tell me the line number.
15 onwards, all the statements will execute by the main thread. Is it?
15 onwards, why? Main method means every statement in this method is going to be executed by main thread.
Yeah. So, but why it will wait for query dot result? You said that query dot
See,
result.
if I'm not getting the result of the student method, then what should I print here? If I'm not getting the result of the student method, if the student information is not written by the student method, then how I can print the first name and last name?
Yeah, correct. But it will be already executed by the main thread. No? Since those.
So this method means, see, you are just calling this method here. You are just calling this method, and the method execution started here. But do you know whether at this particular time, right, the method execution completed or not? Because after this statement, right, once this statement, right, main thread is released. Main thread doesn't care about the case student method anymore, right? Then how you will make sure, right, that the method execution completed? How you will get the data of this method? Did you attend our asynchronous programming sessions?
Yes, sir. I have attended.
I'm doubt, because see, in this case, okay, to give you an idea, I can directly write the result statement here, right? So in this case, what is the query is going to store, right? I can directly write the result statement here, right? What is the difference between these two statements? So in this statement, so result means it will wait till the method complete its execution. And I cannot write the await operator here, right? Why I cannot write the await operator? Can anybody tell me?
Main method is not a async method.
Right? See, but as main method is not async, then I cannot write the await operator. But I want the result. Then can I write the result property here?
Yes.
So in this statement, what will happen? Until and unless you are not receiving the result, right, from this method, this statement is going to execute.
No, it has to wait for the
This
for the-
statement is it's not going to execute. But what I may what my intention is, okay, this statement what I am printing here, it is no related with the return, right, with the result of this method. So let me do this task here when it is required at this particular time, right? At this particular time, I need the result of the of this method. So at this particular time, you need the result. Okay, then just call the result property on this query, because in this case, it is returning the task of student, not the result. And when you call the result property, it is going to return the student. We have already discussed this thing in our asynchronous programming. Yes or no, guys? We have discussed this thing or not?
yes. Yep.
Then Bhargav, did you attend all the sessions of asynchronous programming and did you practice all these things?
Yes, sir. I have attended the thing. What I was remembering is like after that statement, now wait statement, all the statements will be executed by the main. But
So in in this case, every statement is going to be executed by the main thread only. Whatever I have written inside the main method, everything is going to be executed by the main thread only. Right? In this method, I have written, right? I have written the thread ID here, thread ID here, thread ID here. If you are still doubt to whether this statement is executed by the main thread, put this statement. Again, this main thread ID is going to be printed, right? So whatever main method means, everything is going to be executed by the main thread only, right? So you can see what is the thread ID? Thread ID one. Only the rest of the code, what is you have written, right after the operator, right? Those are going to be executed by the different thread.
Yeah, it would be like, you know that you're going to need those results later on. So you ask for them in advance, do something else in between, and then when you need it, you really ask for it. Is that
Exactly,
like that?
exactly. In this case, we are just calling the get student method. At this particular line number 14, I'm not bothered about the result of the student method. Whether the get student method execution is completed or not, I'm not caring. So I'm doing I'm executing some other task. I'm doing some other task by the main thread, and it is possible because at this point the main thread is released, right? So these things are possible, right? Now, just to do one thing, just remove this thing, right? See what happened? Why it is saying the error? Task 2 db first of student, because this is one asynchronous method. So you have to write this thing, and if you are not bothered about the result, right? So let me make this as a first or default, not async.
But then it will stop the main thread, right?
Why I'm getting this error?
Because it's a sync method? No.
The method is still async. That is.
No, where you define the get student, you should take the static or not?
No, you have to use that linQ namespace method. So in this case, you can see I'm not making the method as this one, right? Now run the application. Right? See, everything is executed by a different thread or a single thread.
The main thread.
Only main thread. Why? See, in this case, first default method started, first default async method completed, right? Get student method completed. Why? So in this case, you are calling the method, right? But do you release the thread?
No.
Even though it's an async method, but do you release the thread? No, you have not released the thread. That means now the execution is sequentially, right? So if you want to release the thread, then you have to make this method as async, right? So already the async, but you have to release the thread means you have to use the await operator here. And if you are using the await operator, then you have to use the async method, right? So this is the difference, right? And once you make this method as async, now at this particular time, the thread will be released, and that thread will going to do some other task, right? See, now it is going to executed by a different thread. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right. Right. So we have discussed this thing, right? So already. So I would recommend Bhargav, please watch the asynchronous programming videos once more, right? And now this is in this case you can see I'm using the async method, right? I'm using the async method to query the result, right? Now I'm going to show you how you can use the async method to save the data. Save the data means if you are adding some new entity, updating some new entity, or deleting some new entity, right? Then at that time, how you can make use of the asynchronous method, right? So guys, it's very simple. First of all, right, based on your return type of the method, you need to decide a task or a task of T. So in this example, as you can see, the method doesn't return anything. So I have marked this method as a task. I'm making this method as async, and here you can see I'm just using the context dot save changes async method. And here I'm using the await operator. So the thread which is calling executing this method, right, at this line number, that thread will be released. And once this async method execution is completed, right, save async changes async, another thread from the thread pool will come and execute the rest of the code, right? So this is how you can use the save changes method. Let us understand this with an example. Right. So here, this is my new object, right? As you can see, student, right? So student, and here I'm calling the save student method, and here I'm passing the new student. So here, you can see first name, last name, and a standard ID I'm providing, and the ID, the primary key, it is going to be auto generated, right? So save student method start whichever thread start this one, that thread ID is going to print. I'm adding the student. So at this particular statement, what will be the entity state? Can anybody tell me what is the new student entity state? What is the state of this entity?
Added.
Added. So if the entity state is added, right, when I'm calling the save changes method, which SQL script is going to be generated by the context object?
Create a
Insert insert. Then
insert,
no,
sir.
create is basically used to create the table, right? So in this case, it is going to generate an insert. But at this particular time, right, when you use the await operator, that the thread which is executing this number of statement, right, and the thread which is calling this method, right, that thread will be released. And once that thread is released, that thread will come here, and we are not making that result operator because this method doesn't return anything. So that thread will immediately complete its execution. And when this method completed, right, then you will see that the save changes method completed by thread ID, save student method completed by thread. This particular statement, you will see a different thread ID, right? So let me run this application. So right, so you can see this is going to be a different thread ID. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, so no need to worry about try and I mean, what happens if there is an error while in the async task?
Right,
Or
sir,
in
right. So I've already discussed this thing, right? How to handle the
okay,
error in asynchronous programming,
okay. Okay.
right? Yes or no? So
Yeah.
in
No,
this case, say if you are using a task, then you can still handle that error, right? But in this case, first of all, you need to make this method as async, right?
okay, yes.
Because in this case, if until and unless I'm not making this method as async, I cannot. What I can say, I cannot use the await operator here. I cannot use the result operator here. Why I cannot use the result operator here? Because this method doesn't return anything, right? If you try to use the result operator, you will get some error, right? Even though you can see result, the intelligence, it's not showing the result. Why? Because this method is return type is a task, right? And for that, you have to make this method as async from one asynchronous method. You have to call this async student method. You have to use the await keyword within the try catch block. You have to write the things, and then you can handle the things, right?
Okay.
Right. We have
Because
already discussed, and we should cover more and more
my
things.
mistake, my mistake,
No,
my
it's
mistake.
not. It's not your mistake, right? Sometimes something I need to memorize this thing, right? You can go and watch those things, right? But still, then if you are unable to figure out, then please let me know, right? So in this example, you can see I'm using the async method. Now I will show you one example where I'm going to use the asynchronous operation and for both get and for getting the data and for posting the data, right? Right. So in this case, you can see this is my main method, right? Main method is started by whichever thread start the main thread that ID I'm printing here. I'm just calling this async query and save, right? Async query and save method, I'm passing the student ID. So one value I'm passing, that is nothing but your student ID. So this is my async orient set method, and this is a static method. And here you can see, as it's a static method, I'm calling directly. And if it is a non-static method, then I have to create an instance of this class and I have to call this method, right? So get student, this is one method I'm calling from here, right? So this method started by which thread, that ID I'm printing. I'm just calling this get student method. So from this line number, it will go to the get student method, right? So this get student method, what exactly it is doing? It is just printing the thread ID, right? Which is executing this code, and then I'm creating the context object. I'm fetching the data asynchronously, right, using the await operator, right? And then I'm returning the data. But in this case, guys, you can see I'm using the await operator. Await operator means what? Now the thread which is calling this get student method, it is going to be released, right? So, and that thread is going to be released, and that thread will come here, and that thread will be execute this line here, right? That means this line number is going to be printed by the same thread, that is the main thread whose ID is 1, right? Then wait till the get result, student result, right? So here I'm writing the get result. So at this particular time, right, it will wait till this method execution completed and return the data, right? Once this method execution get faster default async method execution completed, then what will happen? One of the thread from the thread pool will come into the picture, and that thread will assign the result to this student variable. That thread will execute this thread ID, and that thread will execute this print statement. So in this case, these two statement, whatever I have written faster default async completed, get student completed, you will see a different thread ID, and then it will return the data, right? Once the data is returned, right, that will be stored inside this variable. And here I'm modifying the first name and the last name, right? So I'm modifying the first name and last name, and then I'm calling this save student method with this student object, right? With this student object. Now come to the save student method. Now it will go to the save student method, right? This method execution completed. This save student method, this object will come to this place. Now guys, tell me, this student, for this context object, it is a connected entity or it's a disconnected entity? Guys,
Disconnected.
because why disconnected? Because this object is created and written by a different context object, right? And this object, right, this context object has no idea whether, right, by looking at the student object, can it identify the entity state? It might be a new object, it might be an existing object. This context object has no idea, because this context object is not created by this context. Sorry, this entity is not created by the context object, right? So in this case, it simply cannot predict what is the state of entity state of this entity. Then you know how to provide the entity state, right? So you know, this entity state having one property, that is nothing but your ID, student ID, right? And if the student ID value is there, that means it's a new entity or it's an existing entity, guys.
Existing.
And if the value is 0, means it's a new entity, right? That means here I need to use the this entry method to set the state of the entity, right? And you know how to do this. Context dot entry method, I have to pass the new student, and I have to set the state, right? How you are going to set? Now, if student ID equals to 0, means if it's having the default value, then the state is going to be added. And if the value is not equals to 0, then it is going to be the state as modified, right? So you have to first set the entity state, right? Once you set the entity state, then you can see I'm just printing whichever thread executing my method, right? And here I'm calling the save changes method, right? So here I'm calling the save changes method based on the entity state. In this case, right? So in this case, by looking at this get student method and the rest of the code, so what should be the entity state? Added or modified?
Modified.
modified. So in this case, it is going to generate the update statement, but here you can see it is using await operator. Means what? Now the thread which is executing the application code, in this case the main thread, right? It is going to release, and it is going to release, and it is going to print this statement, right? And once this statement is printed, and here I'm writing the result property, right? So I'm waiting for the result to be received by the save student method, right? Then at that time, once this save changes method execution is completed, another thread will come into the picture, and that thread will execute this statement, that thread will execute this statement, and that thread will return the data that student saved successfully, right? And that data, what it is returned by this student saved, so it's a string value, right? As it's a string value, then what should be the return type? Task of a string,
Task
right?
of string.
Right? And in this case, you can see the return type of this variable is going to be string because it is returning a string, right? And whatever data it return, that is I'm printed here and I'm printed by the main method, right? So whatever code inside this method, everything is going to be executed by the main thread. Whatever code inside this method, everything is going to be executed by the main thread, right? In this method, up to this, right? Up to this, the execution is done by the main thread, and from this onwards, right, assigning the output to this, it is going to executed by a different thread. And same in this case, right, from this method, these things are going to be executed by a different thread, right? Let me run the application and see how many threads are executing our application code. If our understanding is fine, then there should be 3 threads, right? So you can see faster default async method completed, get student method completed, right? That means faster default async method completed. This is going to be executed by a different thread, right? So this is going to be executed by a different thread, right? And once the execution completed, this thread will again put into the thread pool, right? And then when I'm executing the same method, this is going to be executed by a different thread, right? So what is the thread ID? In this case, same, the same thread it is using, because we cannot predict which thread will come into the picture, right? Let me run this application once more to see. Let's assume that a different thread will come into the picture. No, again the same thread it is using. Okay, let me run this one once more. Right now you can see a different thread, right? Faster default method executed by the thread ID whose ID is 7. And now save changes is executed by a different thread, because you cannot simply predict which thread will come from the thread, right? The same thread might be executed or a different thread. In this case, you can see a different thread. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So this is how you need to use asynchronous, right? So we have seen the example of performing the performing the insert operation, performing the update operation, and also performing the select operation, right? Now let me show you one example how you can how you can use asynchronous operation to perform the delete operation, right? So I'm creating one method delete student async, right? And this method taking the student ID. Okay, let me first check what is the newly created student whose ID, right? I want to delete that particular student. So go to this scoring. What is the student ID? 5072, right? So I have to pass that 5072 here. 5072. Guys, whenever I'm passing the day, whenever you are using my code, don't blindly pass the ID what I'm passing. You have to check the database, and accordingly you have to pass the ID, right? 5072. Then this method execution will started, right? And here it is using the find async, right? I have shown you where faster default async. Right now I'm using the find async. Previously we have used find method, but now I'm using the find async method, right? So in this case, what will happen, right? In this case, what will happen? Can anybody tell me?
It will use the ID to find it.
And that is fine. In this case, it will find the student by using that primary key value. But as I'm using the await operator, right? The thread will be released or not?
Yeah, it will be released.
right? Then whatever student data we receive, we can remove by using the remove method. So in this case, what will it will do? It will mark the entity state as deleted, right? And so in this case, once you release the thread, right, a different thread will come into the picture to execute the rest of the statement. Yes or no? That means the assignment,
Yes.
right? Whatever the student that will stored inside this variable, it is going to be executed by a different thread, right? So, right, and then that thread ID, right, it is going to print here, right? Whichever thread executing the rest of the code up to now, right? This that thread particular ID it is going to print here. But guys, here you can see once you call this remove method, the entity state will be marked as deleted. And when you call the save changes method, right? Then at that time, what will happen? It will generate the delete SQL query and execute it in the database. But again, I'm using the await operator. So as I'm using the await operator, that means the new thread which is executing this much of code, that thread will release or not?
Yes.
Yes.
That thread will be released. Again, once the execution is completed, then again a new thread will come into the picture to execute this rest of the code, right? So anytime you use the await operator, whether it is the main thread or it is a threadful thread, right, that is going to be released, right? And once that is done, right, now you can see here, once I call this method, right, when first time the await operator is used, that means the main thread is released, and main thread is released means this statement is going to be printed, right? And then here we are waiting for the result. As we are waiting for the result, so once you return this statement, right, student deleted successfully, right, then rest of the code it is going to print, right? So in this case, let me run the application and see how it is executing, right? Right, you can see save changes method started by thread ID 5 and this method completed by thread ID 7, right? So save changes method started by thread ID 7. This is started by thread ID 1. Find async method started by thread ID 1, right? Then save changes method started by thread ID 7, and then sorry, save changes method started by thread ID 5, and this particular statement it is using a different thread because that thread whose ID is 5, right? It is going to release at this particular line, and to execute rest of the code, a new thread will come into the picture, and in this case, that thread ID is 7. Clear?
Yes.
Right? So this is already we have this. So the working principle we have already discussed, and here we just see how we can use the asynchronous version, right? So find async, save changes async, right? And for each and everything there is a async method, right? First of all, default to list async, first of default async, right? Every method there is an asynchronous version. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Any question from anyone? Okay, right. So the next important topic what we are going to discuss is bulk insert, update, and delete in entity framework. We have already discussed this thing, but let me show you again this thing, and then I will show you why it is very dangerous to use the bulk method which is provided by the entity framework, right? So in ADO.NET, we have already discussed how to perform the bulk operation, right? We have discussed the SQL a bulk copy class. We have discussed some storage, how you can make use of storage procedure, right? So we have already discussed. The same thing we are going to discuss using entity framework. Using entity framework, how we can perform the bulk insert, how we can perform the bulk update and delete operations, right? So from entity framework 6, right, there is a method called dbset.addRange is used. Let us first try to understand this bulk insert. So to perform bulk insert, the entity framework provided one method called dbset.addRange, and to this method we need to pass a collection of entities. Right. So what this method will do is it will attach all those entities to the context object with the added state. And whenever we call the step changes method, right, it will generate insert SQL statement and execute on the database, right? Let us see this thing practically, right? So in this case, this is my collection, right? I'm creating a collection of three students, and here you can see first name I'm providing like this, and I'm using the last name same for all the entities, right? And then I'm calling the bulk insert method by passing this new students, right? And what this bulk insert method is going to do, it is creating an instance of my context class. What SQL statement generated for that purpose, I'm writing this db context.database.log statement. But guys, do not write this statement in your production, right? Do not write, because it is unnecessary going to log the data any the SQL statement, which is might be a good thing for the hacker to hack your application. And again, it is going to take time, right? If I'm logging this thing, means it is going to take some time to log this information, which is not required, means it is going to take some time, means it is going to degrade the application performance. For understanding purpose, for knowing what exactly happening behind the scene, for your point of view, it is good, right? Then I'm using the add range method. I'm passing this new list of students, and this add range method will mark the entity state of all this entity, right? Of John, Sarah, and Pam to added state. And when I call this changes method, behind the scene, right? Behind the scene, insert statement will generate to insert the data into the database. And then I'm calling this get students method by passing the uh, value, last name value, and here you can see it is going to fetch the student data from the database. And here, guys, I'm using something different, right? So something different means, right, if you are fetching some data using the numeric value, right, integer value, that is fine. But if you are fetching some string value, right? If you want to fetch the data based on the first name, based on the last name, based on the gender, right? That means if you are passing some string value, then it is always better to use the equals method, right? And you have to pass the name, whatever name value you want to compare, and you have to use this string comparison invariant culture ignore case. So what is the use of this property means? You can see compare string using culture sensitive sort rules, the invariant culture, and ignoring the case of a string being compared, right? So what it means, suppose in your database some first name column is there, right? In that case, in this case, I'm passing Taylor, so I'm passing T capital letter or LOR in capital letter, but in your database these two letters are in lower case, and you want to ignore this case things, right? Then you have to use this invariant culture ignore case, right? And here it is going to compare this last name with the last name column of our student table, right? In our student table, this is my student table, right? So let me run this, and once it execute this statement, right, method, right, how many number of records are there, right, that is going to be returned, right? So and then I'm going to print those things, right? So here you can write the toList method, right? And then you can print the data, right? Now let me run this application. Why I'm saying it is dangerous to use entity framework methods for bulk operation, now you can imagine, right? So how many student I am inserting, guys?
3 students.
Three
Three
students.
students. So you can see, so you can see how many insert statement it is generated.
Three.
That means how many number of database trip to the database.
Three.
That means it is going to give you a better performance, or it will degrade your application performance.
Degrade.
Regret. So basically, we need to find some approach where within a single round trip, we should perform the CRUD operations, right? And we should avoid inserting the data manually, right? We should avoid writing this insert statement again and again. There should be some sort of logic, right, where we can perform the insert statement within a single query, right? And if you know, right, if you know, while we are discussing in ADO.NET, right, we are using some kind of a merge statement, right? Right, using the merge statement, using the data table, right, we are comparing, we are joining, and if the data is matched, right, then we are updating the data, and if it is not matched, right, we are adding the data, right? So that kind of functionality we also need, right? Because in this case, writing the insert, see, in this case you can imagine 1,000 records. It's a common scenario that from one Excel file you are having 1,000 records, and you want to insert all those 1,000 record into the database, and performing that 1,000 insert operation, making 1,000 number of times database round trip from your .NET application to your database, how dangerous it is, right? You should avoid using this add range method, right? How then, if we are avoiding this add range method, then how we can perform that operation, we'll discuss next, right? But for now, you can see the number of a database round trip to the database is nothing but the number of entities you are having and you want to insert. That means this add range method is equivalent to 3-time add method, right? If you are calling the add method, save changes method 3 times, that is same as this add range method, right? So you should avoid using this add range method. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So this add range method is there, but you should avoid. Now I'll show you how to perform the bulk update operation, right? So bulk update operation means what I'm trying to do here is, so I'm creating one bulk update method. I'm passing the last name as Taylor, right? So now if you go, then you will see 3 students are inserted with the last name as Taylor. So first of all, I'm fetching all these 3 students from the database, right? And once I fetch the database, I'm using a for each loop. And now, guys, remember, this is the context class. So here I do not, okay. So this is the context class, and using the context class, I'm fetching the data, right? As I'm fetching this student list using the context class, means this student list is tracked by this context object or not,
Yes.
right? And here you do not need to set the entity state, right? And here I'm modifying the context object. As I'm modifying the context object means the context object, right, know what is the state of each entity, right? And when you call the save changes method, right, based on the entity state, right, as you can see, we have modified all the 3 entities, right? So you will see it will set the entity state as modified, and when you call the save changes method, right, it is going to generate the update SQL query, and it will update this first 3 this 3 we can say this 3 student data into the database, right? And then I'm just passing the student name get student method Taylor to see whether this changes what I have done here, it is affecting or not, right? So let me run this application. Right. So you can see first name changed for this 3 student whose last name is Taylor, and you can see the standard ID value is also to whatever we have set, that is take effect. But the bad thing is that how many update statements are there? 3 update
3.
statements. That means how many number of times the database round trip is there?
3 times.
3 times. That means it's a good from the performance point of view, or it's bad from performance point of view to use this save changes method to update the data. Right?
It's not good.
Not good.
It's not good. So you should avoid using this save changes method, right? So now I'm going to show you how you can perform the bulk delete. Right? So you know there is a remove method to remove one entity which will state the entity state as deleted. So similarly, we have something called a remove range method, right? So in this case, what my requirement is, I want to remove all the student from the database whose last name is Stella, and we are having three student whose last name is Taylor, right? So you can see this is the three result, right? So I'm going to delete those three, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm first fetching the three student data, right? Once I'm fetching the data, I'm passing that student list to this remove range method and calling the set changes, right? In this case, I'm calling this get student method by passing the Taylor as the name, and you will see there are no more records in the database student table which last name is Taylor, so it is going to return me the count as a 0, right? So as it is returning me the count as 0, so it is going to print no records found with the last name Tela, right? So let me run this one, and again you will see the save changes method. It is going to generate three delete statements, right? So you can see three delete statement 1, delete statement 2, and delete statement 3. That means the number of round trips to delete the data is nothing but equivalent to the number of entities you want to delete, right? And as the more number of entities, the more time it will take to delete the data. So you should avoid using the bulk functionality which is provided by the entity framework, right? So if you are going to perform the bulk insert, update, and delete operations, right, then you should avoid using this save changes method, right? Now the question will come to your mind, how we can do these things, right? There is a tweet, there is a problem. See, if you notice the three examples that we discussed look pretty and simple, but the problem is they will generate insert, update, delete SQL statement for each entity based on the entity state. And this is a known problem in entity framework. This is a known problem in entity framework for bulk insert and delete operations, right? So this is a known problem. And at this time, Microsoft doesn't have any recommended solution instead of using third-party libraries. Clear, guys? Right?
Yes.
In .NET Core, in Entity Framework Core, they have improved this thing, right? That add range and remove range functionality, they have improved somehow. But in .NET Framework, right, they do not have any solution, right? Instead, you should use some third-party libraries to perform the bulk operation, and that is what we are going to discuss, right? So what you need to do? So there are many third-party tools are available on internet to perform the bulk update operation, insert operation, and delete operation. But the one which I like the most is this DLL, right? Z.entityframework.extensions, right? So what you need to do, you need to install this DLL from the NuGet, right? So tools, NuGet package manager, and you have to go to the NuGet package manager console, right? So then you have to search for z.entityframework.extensions, right? This is the DLL. I have already installed on my machine. You have to install the latest one, right? Don't install the earlier one. You have to choose the latest one and you have to install, right? Already I have installed, so it is showing me the on install button, right? And in your application, if it is not installed, then it will show you the installed button and you just need to click the install button, right? Once you install the this entity framework extension, then what it will do? So basically, what exactly it is saying? The entity framework extension, this DLL, extend your DB context with high performance bulk operations, right? High performance bulk operation means bulk changes, right? Bulk insert, bulk delete, bulk update, bulk merge, and many more. And this DLL is support to perform the bulk operation on SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, SQLite, and more, right? That means, and if you want to find more information, you can visit on this URL, right? If you want to know how to use this DLL for performance benchmark, you need to visit to this DLL, this URL, right? So information is provided. That means this DLL extend the DB context, right? And it provide, by extending the DB context, it provides some bulk insert, update, and delete functions, right? Using those functions, you can perform the bulk operation very effectively, right? Now using the same context class, right? Same context object, I can call this bulk insert update and delete method, right? How is this possible? This is possible because this bulk insert, bulk save changes, bulk update, bulk delete, right? These are implemented as extension method, right? And this extension method will point to our DB context class. As it is point to our DB context class, so can I call this method using our DB context instance? So first of all, tell me what is the extension method? Guys,
It is a method which is used, which we can make as a method for the class without modifying the class definition.
exactly. So in this case, the DB context class, does that class provide any functionality called bulk insert, update, and delete? Is there any method called bulk insert, update, and delete? They are having add range, add remove method. They are having save changes method. What does this context class having these methods?
No.
But I want to create a method with the name bulk insert, and I want to call that method by using the context object. Then in that case, then what I need to do, I need to create one static class. I need to create one static method with this name. And the first parameter should be the name of the class name, using which class object I want to invoke this method. We have already discussed this concept, right? Extension method. Please see that video or document so that you will understand these things. That means, so the point that you need to remember, entity framework extension means every method what you are seeing here is are implemented as extension method on the DB context class, right? So that using the same DB context object, right, I can invoke this method. Clear?
Yes.
Right. So you are not going to define this method as extension method. This method are defined by this CDLL z.entityFramework.extension, and they have provided the logic. They have written the logic which is going to perform the bulk operation effectively. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So you can see this is the tlz.entityFramework.extension, right? So now we are going to perform the bulk operations, right? So what is extend our DB context with the high performance bulk operation, what we have discussed, and it is used from which database you can use this. These are the database: SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, SQLite. Advantages, what is the advantages, why I'm preferring this extension to use? Because it is easy to use, it is flexible, it is increase the application performance, it is increase the application responsiveness, it reduce the database load by reducing the number of database round trip, right? So as you are reducing the number of round trip, so means what, it is reducing the load on the database server, right? So let us try to understand the bulk insert, update, and delete operations, how you can perform, right? So this entity framework extension provide two method. One is bulk insert and another one is bulk insert async, right? So by looking at this two method, can anybody tell me what is the difference between these two methods?
One of it is async method.
Yes,
Bulk
it is.
method.
It is a non-async method, it is a async method, right? Whichever version you want, you can use. If you want to make the operation asynchronous, right? So while I'm updating the data in the database, I'm not interested to block my thread, right? Then you can use this async method, right? So what my intention is, I'm going to show the example using bulk insert, and it is a task for you guys to do the same example by using bulk insert async method. Clear? And if you want, right, you can use the cancellation token. And if you do not want, then don't use the cancellation token. Another overloaded version like this is also available, right? You know what is the use of a cancellation token. Can anybody tell me what is the use of a cancellation token? Guys?
To cancel an async operation if it taken too long, for instance.
Exactly. Suppose you call this bulk insert async method, and your intention is within 10 seconds. If the execution is completed, that's fine. If not completed, then cancel the operation. Then in that case, you have to create one cancellation token source. You have to set the time when the token is going to be cancelled, and that token you need to pass to this method, right? We have already discussed this thing, so I'm not going to discuss those things again. So here I'm going to use this bulk insert method, and it's a task for you guys to use this bulk insert async and do the task, right? So let us start the discussion by using the insert method, right? What is the insert method and how you can use the insert bulk insert method, right? So first of all, and for this, you do not need to include any namespaces, because whatever method, right, this extension provide, those method I'm going to invoke by using the context object only, right? So you can say this is the context object. Using this context object only, I'm going to call the bulk insert method. I'm not going to invoke this bulk insert method using any other instances. I'm only going to invoke by using this bulk insert, and this is possible because if you go to the definition, then you will see that it's an extension method. How you are making sure? Who is on mute? Right? So if you look at this class, so this is a static class. So what is the rule of extension method? The method should be defined within a static class, right? So in this case, you can say it is the static class. Second is that that method should be defined as a static method. In this case, this is the static method. And the third means it should accept the DB context as a parameter for the first. So in this case, it is the DB context instance taking as the first parameter. From the second parameter, you can use your own parameter. And in this case, it is taking I enumerable of T entities, right? And where T is a class. So in this case, I enumerable of T means what? Now, in this case, this new instance, what I'm passing, this is nothing but I enumerable of T, and here T is nothing but student, right? So this is implemented as an extension method, and to this extension method, I can pass an I enumerable of T. And here I list of student I have created, and that student I'm passing here, right? So what exactly it is going to do? See, in this case, the same example, right? It is the same example what we have discussed with our add range method, right? In our add range method, what we have done, we have write this code, right? Context dot, right? Context dot students, right? Context dot students dot, and we have reused the add range method. And to this add range method, we have passed this new students, and then we are just calling the context dot save changes. These things we have done previously, and we have seen in this case, it is going to generate uh, insert statement depending upon the number of entities. If you are having 3 entities, it is going to generate a 3 insert statement. That is what we need to avoid, right? And for that purpose, we are using some extension, and that extension is nothing but j.entityFramework.extension. And this extension provide one method called the bulk insert, right? So you can see there is also another method called bulk insert async, right? So you can try this bulk insert async, right? So I'm not going to do this thing. So in this case, bulk insert method is there, and to this method, I'm passing this new student. Now making the entity state, what is the entity state, right? We do not need to be worry about, because these things are going to be managed by the insert class. You do not need to call the save changes method, because that is going to be managed by the insert class, bulk insert class. This bulk insert class in a single database round trip, right? In a single database round trip, going to insert all the 3 records into the database, right? And to show what SQL statement is generated by this bulk insert class, you can also make use of this database.context.log, right? And once the method is completed, right, you can call this get student method to see whether the data, right, what you are passing with the last name Taylor are inserted into the database or not, right? So in this case, let me see, is there any student with the last name Taylor? No, right? So if this bulk insert operation successfully done, right, then you can see the 3 student which we have added, right? Let me run the application. bulk started and completed, right? And now you can go and verify the database. Yes, three students are inserted, right? Now you can see what exactly it is using. It is creating some data table, right? Sorry, not a data table. It is how it is performing the bulk of insert update operation, right? So if you see the last thing, what exactly it is using, what it is exactly using, which statement, merge, right? It is not using that insert statement to insert one by one record, right? It is using the merge statement, right? And it is using merge statement to perform the insert as well as update operation, right? So in this case, you can see when matched is not there, right? Why? Because we are going to perform the insert operation. Insert operation means what? It means if the data already inserted, suppose you are passing one student whose ID is already there in the database, then in that case, it is not going to insert that again, right? You can see, so I'm using the mod statement, but here you can see when not matched. When matched, that condition is not there. When not matched, right? If that student ID is not available in the database, then it is going to insert the data. And using this merge, not only using merge, it is using some kind of a temporary table, right? And temporary table and the merge statement to do the delete operations, right? So if you remember, guys, while working with ADO.NET, right? At that time, I have shown you how to perform the bulk insert and update operation using the merge statement, right? Why I'm using at that time merge? Because merge giving you a better performance than any other things, right? So in this case, you can see the entity framework also internally using this merge statement, right? Now you might be one question, sir. If I do not want to use this extension, then can I do this functionality by manually? Yes, you can do this. You can write the storage procedure the way we are writing the storage procedure in ADO.NET. In the same way, you can write the storage procedure in your what I can say in the database. Then you can import the database into your entity data model that will be created as a method, and you just need to call that method, right, guys? How to call the storage, how to call the storage procedure, right? That is what we are going to discuss tomorrow, right? But that is also possible, right? So this is how it is going to perform the insert bulk insert operation. Clear, guys? So in this case, you will not find three insert statement. Everything what you are seeing here, it is going to be generated by a single database call, right? Clear, guys? And you do not need to worry what SQL statement it is generated, how it is performing the bulk insert of operations, right? If you are very good understanding of SQL, then you can verify this thing. If you do not know what is SQL, right, and you do not have more in knowledge related to SQL, what is a temporary table, what are the use of a exist operator, what is the use of a union operator, what is right, all these things, if you do not know, then don't go through this. Otherwise, you will not understand, right? If you are having very good knowledge, then you can go with the content, right? So this is how it is performing the bulk insert operations. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now there might be a question, sir. How you can saying here you might be one question, sir. In this case, I can see the number of SQL statement generated, right? If I'm comparing the same example with the add range method, there are little SQL statement generated, right? So the number of SQL statement with this bulk insert is very large than the way shape changes method does. Then how you can say that this is going to perform better than the add range and shape changes method? Can you prove this? Okay, let us come and prove this thing, right? Let us take a performance measurement between the shape changes method and the bulk insert method, right? So what we are going to do, we are going to do insert 1,000 records, right? So we are going to insert 1,000 records using both the approaches, right? So using both the approaches means I'm going to insert 1,000 records by using shape changes method, and I'm going to do the same thing, right, using the bulk insert method, right? So this is fast execution. So this is nothing but you can say this is a fast time execution, and this we will not take into consideration, right? So you know what, now whenever we are doing for the fast time, right, it is going to take some time. And whenever you are taking the performance measurement, right, always try to avoid the fast time execution, right? From the second time onwards, you can consider this. The first time means what I'm doing, I'm generating 20 students, right? So if you go to this method will take one input parameter and it will generate that many number of student and that will return, right? So in this case, you can see it is creating a new student and adding that new student into this column. See, if I'm passing 20 means here this loop will execute for 20 times and 20 number of student will be added with the naming convention. You can see first name plus I, last name plus I, and by default I'm providing the standard. So the name will be first name underscore one, first name underscore two, first name underscore three, like this it will generate. And same in the case of a last name, right? So this is the method, right? So you can say I'm calling the generate student method. So it is going to generate 20 student, and I'm saving this 20 student using the add range method, calling the save changes method, and as well as see, once I call this method, I'm deleting the students, right? So how to delete the data? By using the bulk delete, right? So what is bulk delete? I will show you later. But for now, so what I'm doing, I'm just deleting the data. And here, I'm also doing the same thing. Here, I'm inserting the data, right? Using the bulk insert method. What is this option that I will say, I will explain later. And I'm also deleting. So here, this is starts a wrap up where I'm inserting 20 record using both the approaches. As soon as I insert the 20 record, I'm also deleting the 20 record. So like the way we are using the bulk insert, this is the bulk delete, which is going to delete this data. And this is just a warm up, you can say, right? So this is not the actual code which we will take into consideration, right? So don't consider the below for performance testing, right? This first time execution means this thing is completed. This method will not take into consideration for performance testing, right? So now what is our intention? Give me 1 minute, guys. Right. So what is our intention? We need to generate 1,000 students, and the same 1,000 student I'm going to save using the save changes method and using the bulk insert method. And as I have to measure the time, so I'm creating two stopwatch. One stopwatch to measure the time that is taken by the save changes method. Another stopwatch to measure the time, how much time it is taken by the bulk insert method, right? I'm creating two context objects. So this is context object one and this is context object two. So in context object one, I'm using the save changes method. So to do the thing, what I'm doing, so I'm just adding this list to the add range method, which will mark each entity state as added. Then I am starting the stopwatch. I'm calling the save changes method. I'm stopping the stopwatch. Right now, how much time the save changes method took to insert all those 1,000 record into the database, right? That is what I'm printing here, right? Time taken 11 milliseconds, and how many number of entities are inserted, that count also I'm printing here, right? So this is the method which is going to perform the bulk insert using the save changes. This is the set method approach 2, and in this case, I'm going to use the bulk insert, right? So I'm starting the stopwatch, I'm using the bulk insert, and I'm stopping the stopwatch. And here I'm just printing the count, and here I'm using this time taken, right? So here I am using one option, auto map output direction to false. What it means, if you remember in edu.net, right? So whenever I'm executing some query, right, DML statement, so it will always return the number of statements affected, right? And if we and in that case, we know we do not interested with the output of the DML statement, right? And if you are disabling that, then somehow it will improve the application performance. So for that purpose, I'm using this option parameter here, and I'm setting that I'm not interested with the output of the insert, update, or delete operation. So I'm making this parameter value to false to improve the performance, right? And this is the student list that what I want to insert, right? So now let me run the application and show you the time taken by both the approaches. And then you will imagine how dangerous shape changes method is. Right? Operation is executed. So you can see the same 1,000 record shape changes take how much milliseconds? Guys,
542 minutes,
and with bulk insert, what is the time taken?
21 minutes.
Then which is giving you better performance?
Bulk insert, of course.
Then you should go with bulk insert instead of shape changes. Clear?
Yep.
Right? So this is how you need to perform the bulk insert in your application, right? Next, what I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you the other one, right? So other one means how you can perform the bulk update and how you can perform the bulk delete, right? So to perform the bulk update operation, you can go with the bulk update method, right? So let me copy the code, right? So in this case, what I'm trying to do, I'm calling this bulk update by passing this value 1, right? And this one, it is nothing but your standard ID. So with standard ID 1, how many records are there? Okay, so where? Okay. Standard ID equals to 1. So how to get the number of account? You have to use the count function, right? So 2023 records are there, which is going to return by this query, right? So 2023 records are there, which is going to return by this query, right? So now, what I'm trying to do, I'm updating all the data. I'm updating all the data. So first name, I'm just appending changed, right? Once I update all the data, then I just need to write the log statement, and I just need to call the bulk update method by passing the student list. That's it, right? So previously we are calling the shape changes method, and in this case we are just calling the bulk update method. Rest of the thing is going to be same. Right now, if you run the application, right, then you will see that it is not going to generate a 2023 update statements, right? It is just going to use a single database call and will do the things, right? So you can see this is how it is updating the data, right? So what exactly it is doing? It is creating some kind of a temporary table, and using the temporary table with the join, right? It is updating the database table, right? You can see update destination set first name, last name, standard ID from this destination table. This is nothing but a table which is created by the entity framework, and then you can see it is deleting the temporary tables, right? So it is using some temporary tables, right? And using this temporary table and joining, it is updating the data. And in this case, you can see it is not generating 2023 number of update statement within a single update statement. It is performing the bulk operation. Bulk operation means there should not be independent individual statement, right? There should not be individual insert, update, and delete statement. Bulk update means it should perform the bulk operation in a index manner, right? And guys, remember, while it is performing, right, it is, you can see from the performance point of view, it is creating some temporary table, right? And it is also applying some indexing to the temporary table, right? So whenever you are taking the performance into consideration, right? So basically the performance depend upon the column type, right? What type of column is there, right? Where you are updating, right? What type of column is in the where condition, whether you are using a column, right, which data type is integer or which data type is character or string, or so integer will definitely give you better performance, right? Again, whether if you are updating the data, right, those updated column value having any indexes or not. If indexes are there, then it will going to degrade your application performance, right? And again, if you are using the where column condition, right, in that where column condition, right, any indexes available or not. If indexes available on the where clause condition, then it is going to improve the performance, right? So many things taken into consideration while improving the performance, right? You should know these things very well from your database perspectives, right? What is the importance of indexes? How creating more number of indexes will degrade the application performance, right? When to use indexes, when not to use indexes. If I'm creating indexes, then on which type of a column the indexes should be created. If I'm creating an index on integer column, and if I'm creating an index on a column varchar type, then what is the difference between them? Which one is going to give you better performance, right? Many things will come into the picture when performance will be considerable, right? So in this case, see, you understand how to perform the bulk update operation, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm going to show you the performance benchmark between the uh, bulk update, which is I'm using bulk update method and the shape changes method, and then you will see how dangerous the shape changes method, right? So basically, I'm going to add another 1,000 students. So you can see I'm calling this add students method, and this add student method is going to generate 1,000 students by calling this method, and then it is inserting bulk inserting those 1,000 records, right? So that means what? Currently, our table having 2023 total number. So how many number of data? All the data is going to be updated by the, right? So currently 2,000 record is there, and this bulk insert will add student will add another 1,000 records. So total 3,000, more than 3,000 records. I'm going to update using both the approaches, right? So I'm creating one stopwatch to measure the time of shape changes, another stopwatch to measure the time of a bulk update, right? So here I'm using the bulk update method, right? Bulk update using shape changes. You know how to do, right? First of all, you need to fetch all the data from the student. I'm going to update all the data, right? And then I'm using a for each loop to update the data. So whatever the first name is there, I'm just appending that name with the update by shape changes method, right? Update by shape changes method. And then I'm starting the stopwatch, calling the shape changes method, stopping the stopwatch and printing the time. So it will print the total number of records which is updated by the shape changes method and how much time it took to update the thing, right? And I'm creating another context object, and in this context object, I'm also fetching all the data from the student list or database table, right? Students database table. I'm also updating the first name and last name, and here I'm appending updated by bulk update method, right? And here I'm using the starting the stopwatch, calling the bulk update method by passing this list of student and stopping the stopwatch. And here I'm just going to print the time taken by this method, right? So now let me run the application and show you the time differences between the shape changes method and bulk update method to perform the bulk update operation using entity framework, right? So you can see, yes, you can see how much time it is taking shape changes method to update 3027 records. 150 seconds, right? 150 seconds, 1500 milliseconds, and with the bulk update, it is taking only 190 seconds. So you can imagine how dangerous this shape changes method while bulk operation will come into the picture using entity framework. And you should avoid. Why I'm saying, because recently one of my project I'm working, right? Some fresher developers, right? Some different team people work on that project, and they have they all everywhere they are using this shape changes method. They are using this add range, remove range method to perform the bulk operation, and that to kill the application performance, right? And my manager, right, assigned that project to me, right? And just ask me, please check why this method is taking why this application, this method are taking more time, right? How we can improve, right? And I have not assigned this task to any of my team member, because I know some performance measure will come into the picture, means some senior developers should handle the things, right? Some fresher, some beginner, right? those who are learning entity framework from some here and there, right? They do not know this thing, right? Because if I ask this question to any of my developer, what is entity state? How the step changes method generating the insert, update, and delete statement? Can you show me the generated SQL statement, right? They are simple line, right? They do not know. They what they know is, yeah, this is my entity. I have to call the add method. I have to call the step changes method. But behind the scene, what is happening, they do not know, right? And if they do not know, then they cannot identify the step changes method, what exactly doing behind the scene, right? So, and here we discussed that step changes method, if you are performing a bulk insert, means it is for you can think that I'm adding a range of entities, right? But for entity framework, but for step changes method, it is not the same case, right? It is generating the insert statement for each and every entities and doing the database round trip again and again and performing the insert operation. And this is the reason why it is killing your application performance. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, so these things you need to be taken into consideration, right? Now if you are working any of your existing project, right, and if you see that somewhere they are using bulk insert, bulk add range, add remove, and if you are deleting, right, or if they are updating multiple record using step changes method, then you can tell this thing to your manager. Hey, hey boss, this is the wrong thing, we can improve the performance in this way. If your manager knows this thing, that is fine. If your manager do not know this thing, right, then you can tell, yeah, this is the thing what we are using behind the scene, this thing is happening, right? We are using add range method or remove range method, but behind the scene, one by one the code is generated and executed in the database. We should avoid this thing. It will not only kill our application performance, but also it will make a load on the database server as well, right? If the number of round trip to the database is more, means there is a more load on the server, right? So we should avoid this thing. Anyone working with the entity framework and anyone using those add range and remove range method? How many of you are working with the entity framework in your existing project?
I use Dapper.
You used Dapper, not okay. And anyone used this entity framework? Add range, remove range, step changes. Okay, fine. If you are not using, then that is also fine. And the advantages, you can see this is easy to use, simple to simply call the bulk update method on the context object, flexible, and it provides different options. Increase performance due to reducing database round trip, increase application responsiveness. Reduction in database round trip also reduce the load on the database server, right? This is what we have discussed. These are the advantages, right? So this is how you can perform the bulk update in entity framework, right? Now we are going to discuss how you can perform the bulk delete operations. Again, to perform the bulk delete operation, it is provided us with the bulk delete and bulk delete async. And to this method, you need to pass the list of entities to be deleted, right? And guys, before moving further, right? So what I'm mean to is, we should to avoid any kind of foreign key referential constant error. Let me delete the data from this table, right? So because some unwanted data, give me 1 minute, guys. Right? So so before yeah, so there are no junk data. So what exactly I'm trying to tell you is, suppose you are having one primary table and one foreign key table, And if you are going to delete the primary key table data, and if it has related data exist in the foreign key, then it will not allow you to delete the data from the primary key table, right? First of all, you need to delete the data from the foreign key table, then only you can delete the data from the primary key table, right? So now what I'm trying to tell you is how what is my requirement, right? And if you see, okay, let me select star from student, right? Let me execute this. So I want to delete this data, right? I want to delete the student ID whose ID is greater than 4. So apart from this 4 student, I want to delete every record, right? That is what my requirement, right? Let's see how you can do this using the bulk delete method. Right? So you can see here, guys, am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So you can see this is my okay. So you can see this is my main method, and inside this main method, I'm calling this bulk delete method, right? So I'm fetching all the student where student ID is greater than 4, right? And then I'm providing this list of student to this bulk delete method, right? So in this case, and I'm just printing. In this case, I'm just calling this bulk delete method, and that's it. And here, I'm just printing what SQL statement is generated by the context class, right? So now let me run the application, right? So this is what you can see, the code is generated, right? So this is the select statement which is fetching the data from the database, right? And then this is the code which is generated by the bulk delete method, and you can see it is deleting from the destination table joining with this, right? So it is not writing a delete statement for individual entities, right? It is using the inner join to delete the data from the database, right? So this is how you need to perform the bulk delete operation in entity framework. Right now I'm going to show you the performance differences between these two approaches, right? So already we have deleted all the data from the database, right? So first of all, we will add some data, and then we will delete the data, right? So in this case, I'm taking these two variable to check how much time the changes method took and how much time this bulk delete method, right? So here I'm creating the context object. First of all, I'm adding 1,000 students, and then I'm fetching those 1,000 students to retrieve the data. So this add student method, you can see it is this add student method, what exactly it is doing, it is generating 1,000 records and then inserting those 1,000 records into the database. And once that 1,000 record inserted, then I'm fetching those 1,000 records here. I'm fetching the student count property here, and I'm using the remove branch method here. I'm using the stopwatch. I'm calling the save changes method, and I'm just calling the stopwatch stop method. Here I'm storing the count here because I want to print the number of entities, right? So that it is going to print, and then I'm printing how much time this save changes method will took to do this task. And here I'm doing the same thing using the bulk delete method. First of all, I'm adding 1,000 records. I'm fetching those 1,000 records to be deleted. I'm printing the count variable. I'm printing the number of entities inside this variable. I'm starting the stopwatch. I'm calling the bulk update method, and I'm stopping the stopwatch. And here I'm printing how much time it is taking to do the task, right? Now run the application and see the differences. Right? So you can see in this case, it is taking, it is taking 275 milliseconds for shape changes and 140 milliseconds for the bulk update method. That means there is clearly is performance differences when we are performing the bulk operation using the shape changes method comparing with the bulk update, bulk insert, and bulk delete extension methods, right? So you should avoid using the shape changes method while performing the bulk operation, right? So that's it for today. In our next session, we are going to discuss how to work with the storage procedure, right? How we can perform the CRUD operations using storage procedure, right? If you look at our database, right, we have created 4 storage procedures, right? One is for delete, one is for insert, one is for update, and one is for getting the student courses by student. That means this is a select operation, this is delete, insert, and update. How we can perform this CRUD operation using storage procedure, that is what we will discuss. Then if you remember, I have not created any functions, right? Then I will show you how you can work with function, right? Later, suppose you add some function, then how you can update your model classes, right? How you can perform the operations, right, using the function. That is what I'm going to show you. And if you remember, we have created one view. Where is that view? Right, we have created one view, right? And I will show you how to use that view. The next things what I'm going to discuss, how to work with storage procedure views and functions using entity framework. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right? So now and guys, whatever a method I have shown you today, I'm not using the asynchronous version, right? So it's a task for you guys to use the asynchronous operations, right? How you can make the method as async and how you can do the operations, right? So this is a task you just try yourself. If you try, then that is good for you, right? If you do not try, then that is a loss for you, right? So I would still recommended everyone to do the task whatever given to you in the class. And guys, remember from the next week, right? From the next week from the Monday, right? Till 2nd January, I'm not going to provide the videos on the Telegram group because I'm traveling and due to limited internet, I cannot upload such a huge volume of videos on the Telegram group. So it's recommended. Yes, the document I can upload, right, but not the videos. And please try to attend the classes regularly.
So those will be recorded, but won't be able to upload it, is it?
Yes, yes, videos will be recorded, but I would not be able to upload the same.
After you coming back, you can upload them.
Yeah, after coming back, I can upload. That is fine.
Okay.
Right, but the thing is that if you are not attending the session, right, suppose you missed one session or two session and then trying to attend the third session, right, then you might not be understand the concept. This is the reason why I'm saying please try to attend all the sessions, right? And I don't know how many sessions I can take, right? But mostly from 25th December to 1st January, the session will be stopped, right? The classes will be stopped. But up to 25th, I will try to take the classes and I will try to complete entity framework whole syllabus, right? So most of the concept of a DB first approach are completed. Then I will start the code first approach and I will also show you how to work with the model first approach, right? So please try to attend the sessions regularly, right? So if you miss, then it is a loss for you, right? Because see, every video is 2 hours. If I'm not uploading 10 videos, and if you are figuring out, I will learn, I will watch those 10 videos, and then I will capture the things, and it is possible, but again, it's going to be a difficult task because currently we are learning something which are very important, right? It is not the basic OOPS concept or not the collection framework, right? These things are interlinked, right? Interlinked means if you missed one class, then the next class will be difficult for you to understand, right? See, in today's session, I have shown you how to work with the asynchronous programming with the entity framework, right? And then I'm showing you in this case, I'm using the bulk insert method, right? So even you can also use bulk delete. So you can also use the bulk delete async, right? But then if you do not know what is exactly async method, then in this case, can I use the await operator? No, you cannot use the await operator here, right? Why I cannot use the await operator? Because this is not a static method, right? But in this case, right? So, but in this case, if I make this method as async, right? Then can I use the await operator here?
Yes.
Right? But for that, what you need to do? You need to make this method as async, right? So you should know this thing. And here I should not use void, I have to use a task, right? So these are the things that you need to use. If I'm using task, then what namespace I need to bring here? Using system dot, right? So that namespace you need to bring them. These are the things you should know. Why it is giving me? It is you cannot use the await operator here, but in this case you can use the await operator, right? This is the common thing. And if you do not know what is async, task, and await, then it will be very difficult for you to understand this concept, right? So because everything is interrelated with each other, right? So and you know there is something called cancellation token source, right? So cancellation cancellation. What is the namespace for cancellation token source? Right, cancellation token source CTS equals to new cancellation token source, right? And here you can specify the time. Again, you can specify the time in two ways, using integer milliseconds or by using the what guys? Timeout, right? So in this case, you can see CTS dot token. That is also possible, right? So in this case, you can see I'm passing one token, right? So if you know this thing, basic concept of what is cancellation token, how exactly it is working, then it should not be a difficult task, right? Now, if you go to the definition, then you will see that the first parameter is nothing but your context class name, right? And the second parameter is nothing but the entities which you want to insert. And the third parameter is the cancellation token. And we have already discussed where t equals to class, what it means. It means in this case, t should be a class. Apart from class, if you pass anything, then it will not work, right? This thing you have already covered. So this should not be a difficult task if you know the basic concept, right? That's it for today. Again, we'll meet tomorrow and we'll try to cover the storage procedure part, storage function part, and the views part. Thank you. Thank you for giving your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.